guys, welcome back to Ferris Tutorials. Food, nutrition and health. CSEC past paper question for exam year 2022. And in this episode, we're looking at question 4. It reads, state 2 factors that contribute to food spoilage and contamination. 2 marks. Name 2 methods of food preservation. 2 marks. For each method of preservation named above, state 1 example of a food that can be preserved using the method. 2 marks. You are preparing boiled cereal and toasted bread for breakfast. Explain 1 chemical change that is expected to take place when heat is applied to each of the breakfast items. 6 marks. While preparing the breakfast, you are baking a cake. On removing the cake from the oven, you notice that the cake is flat. Explain 2 ways in which you could have prevented this from happening. 4 marks. And that gives us a total of 16 marks. Now let's look at the question in details. State 2 factors that contribute to food spoilage and contamination. The factors here, we have 5 and you could select any 2. So the first one is time and temperature abuse. And we speak about the temperature danger zone, which is between 40 degrees Fahrenheit to 135 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is the ideal temperature for bacteria to grow and reproduce. Now, when we speak of time and temperature abuse, we mean that we have taken out the TCS foods or the highly perishable foods and put them at a temperature that it is ideal for bacteria to reproduce for long periods of time, right? Same thing that we may say room temperature, right? So high risk foods such as chicken, such as pork, it may be fish, right? So all animal proteins are considered as high risk food items. Anything that you have to refrigerate for it to be safe is a high risk food, right? Now next, improper storage. Now, if storage is warm and humid, fruits and vegetables left in the open will spoil quickly. Unhygienic surroundings such as poor kitchen hygiene. Another factor you may want to explore is poor personal hygiene. Now, foodborne microorganisms can be introduced from the unwashed hands of people who are infected by bacteria and viruses and who cook and serve the food to consumers. So one of the most important personal hygiene practice is hand washing, right? Very, very much important, because if bacteria or viruses are on our hands, you're not able to see with the naked eye. So it's very important for us to wash our hands often because they touch a lot of places. Good. And next factor is enzymatic actions. Now, food may be bruised or butchered, which cause enzymes to be activated, and a mixture with oxygen can cause food spoilage. So once the animal has been slaughtered or once the crops have been harvested, the enzymes are activated and that will cause them to deteriorate or to spoil, right? And that browning action, for example, those that you may see in meat that look, for example, red meat that looks a little brown, that should be bright red, such as beef. You know that spoilage is taking place or in process. Likewise with other vegetables and other produce. All right. So you're required to state 2 factors that contribute to food spoilage and contamination, and any of these 2 factors are ideal. Now we're moving on to our next question. Name 2 methods of food preservation. 2 marks. So you just require to list 1 mark each, or to name rather 1 mark each. So I have 4 here for you. to choose from. So I have heat, which can be, examples are bottling and canning. There's also cold. Example is refrigeration and freezing. Addition of chemical preservatives, maybe pickling or brine. Now, pickling is when we add certain vegetables to spiced vinegar, right? While brine, on the other hand, is a solution of salt and water. And number 4 there says removal of moisture, and an example of that is dehydration. For each method of preservation named above, state one example of a food that can be preserved using the method. 2 marks. So for heat preservation, we have canned fruits, or it may be bottled fruit juice that has been passed through the process of, say, pasteurization, a quick heat process that kill harmful microorganisms. For cold, we could say frozen vegetables, addition of chemical preservatives, we could say pickled cucumbers. It could also be pickled peppers as well. And the final one here, we have removal of moisture, and that's examples of fresh fruits, such as, for example, fresh grapes are dehydrated and then we get raisins, or fresh fish, same thing that we called, as a result you will get like saltfish, or you may get salted cod, same thing, right? So what the salt does is to pull the moisture from the fish, right, through a process called osmosis, and therefore it absorbs all the moisture or water content. Now, even thinking about like Irish potatoes, say if you're making some homemade fries and you may put like salt on it before, or seasons from it before, you may notice that it tends to pull the water away from the potatoes, right? Same procedure here, or same concept for the removal of moisture from fresh fish, right? And an example of that would be saltfish, or we may say salted cod. Good. You are preparing boiled cereal and toasted bread for breakfast. Explain one chemical change that is expected to take place when heat is applied to each of the breakfast items. Now, what is chemical change? If you say it's a chemical change is something that is irreversible, you are correct, right? Now let us look at the food items that are being cooked and also the cooking method. So we have cereal, which is rich in carbohydrates and it is boiled. So it may be cornmeal, it may be creamy wheat, etc. And of course you have toasted bread there by using a dry heat method. So this is requiring you to think of the concept of effects of heat on carbohydrate foods. When we look at moist heat, what will happen when you add moist heat to carbohydrate foods, or what will happen when you add dry heat to carbohydrate foods, right? So this is just a practical example of how practical question of how it all plays out. All right, let's just look at the ideal response. So we're taking the boiled cereal first, right? Now, the chemical change that is expected is starch granules will swell as it is heated in the presence of water. So think about when you're making cornmeal porridge, right? What do you notice when the cornmeal is starting to boil, right? What do you notice happening? It gets thicker. Good job. So cereal grains will go through a process called gelatinization. Now this swelling process causes the starch granules to thicken the liquid in which they are immersed. And on the other hand, you have toasted bread. The chemical change that is expected to take place is the browning on the toast bread. Now that process is called dextrinization, and it is defined as the breakdown of starch into dextrin, right? Now, it is a non-enzymatic browning and chemical change, which is easily digested as partial breakdown is complete. The characteristics of color, taste, aroma, and flavor may change as a result of this process. So that's the most ideal response, guys, and that is 3 marks for each response, right? So you try to have at least 3 points each so that you can get your maximum 6 marks. Next question. While preparing the breakfast, you are baking a cake. On removing the cake from the oven, you notice that the cake is flat. Explain 2 ways in which you could have prevented this from happening. 4 marks. What could possibly... Now, this question is referring to the topic faults in cake baking, right? Now, tell me what could possibly happen while your cake is flat. Okay. Good responses. Let's just look at these as well. So 1, mix ingredients just enough for even distribution, as overmixing ingredients can create a dense batter that doesn't get the same airy rise. Good. So you just mix until just combine, just as how your ingredients, just as till your ingredients are combined. You don't need to overmix. Because when you overmix, then you create a dense batter. And even though you may have raisin agent in there, because the batter is so dense, because you develop the gluten in the flour, then your product becomes flat. Good. 2, measure all ingredients correctly. Now, mismeasured baking powder, which is too much or too little, may also give a flat cake. So we have to ensure that we're using the correct type of measuring tools and we're leveling off and to get our correct amount of raisin agent. In this case, we may say baking powder. Next, ensure that the leavening agent is not expired, because if it is expired, it's not as effective as before. And 4, bake cake promptly, as some raisin agents are activated by moisture. So once you're finished with the batter, you pour it in your prepared bake pan. You don't leave it on the countertop, right? You go ahead and bake it in the oven to get your maximum volume, right? Because some baking powder or raisin agents are single acting and they start to react. Liquid is added and moisture is introduced. That's it, guys. Good luck.
You're awesome. You've made it to the end of the session. Please remember to like, subscribe, and also share with persons who you know would find this information useful. Don't forget to turn on your post notification bells so you can be notified when there is another upload. Thank you for making it fair